This is ContraZoom, where we go back and forth about film. I'm Dakota Arsenault. The Vancouver International Film Festival is just about to finish on the day that we are recording this, but when it comes out, we will have completed the festival. So we're here today to wrap up the fest by talking about some of our favorite movies we saw. Today, joining the show is Todd Bengali, a writer for Real, who was last heard on episode 272, the 2024 Oscar wrap-up, and two first-time guests in Marta Georgievich, who hosts the podcast McFly's Movie House, and Christopher Cross, who runs the publication Asynchronous Media. Welcome to the show, everyone. How are you doing today?
Hey, guys. Doing well. Thanks for having us on. Very excited to be here and very exhausted at the tail end of the festival.
I know you've seen a lot. Chris, I know you've also seen a lot, too. How are you doing tired-wise?
Surprisingly, I'm doing okay. I've got my sleep where I needed it, but yeah, I'm doing all right. Only one more movie today as we're recording, so should be okay.
Calling it quits.
Yeah.
What about you, Todd? How's your VIF been so far?
It's been busy. Yeah, it's been busy. It's been ups and downs in terms of some days where there's really nothing on the radar, some days where there's like four things. And so it's been good overall though. I've had a really good time. It's been a great slate and a lot of fun at the movies.
I think that sort of speaks to something that I want to ask you guys as well, was what did you think of the lineup? Because none of you three went to TIFF this year, as I did. And so there's quite a bit of overlap for me, but I'm curious how it felt, because I feel like there was less big ticket movies this year than there was maybe compared to last year or something like that. But what did you think of this selection, and was there enough that you were interested in? Obviously, I know Marta and Chris, you guys have seen just about everything, so you've seen more than your fair share. There must have been something that was interesting you, but I'm curious of your thoughts on the lineup. Chris, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, usually I do TIFF, and then VIF ends up being just like catch up on whatever I did miss. So the lineup this year, it didn't, for me, it was good enough. But yeah, there's definitely some big ticket items that for sure I would have loved to have seen. We didn't get the People's Choice Award winner from TIFF, The Life of Chuck, but sounds like that's 2025 release now. So that's fine. We'll get it eventually. Yeah, honestly, I always find VIF is sort of it sounds negative, but it's kind of the dregs of TIFF. But generally speaking, though, it's not. They get the stuff that matters usually for award season. There's just a few that you're like, oh, yeah, that'd be nice to get. Like they announced Saturday night pretty late in the fest, and those kind of hot ticket items.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Marta? How was the lineup for you?
I enjoyed the lineup, definitely. I mean, I agree with you guys. I think in terms of North American releases, like the big ticket items, sure, maybe we didn't get everything that we would have wanted, but I think in terms of international releases, there was a bit of heat, not gonna lie. There was some stuff that I really, really enjoyed.
I mean, we're definitely going to be talking about that today with your picks, because both of your picks were international releases, so you'll have that covered.
Surprise.
And Todd, how was the lineup for you this year?
It was really good. I think that, I'm looking at my selections that we're going to talk about later, and I picked two American films, which is a little strange because I think, like Marta, I saw mostly international films by and large. And in those regards, I think this was like a really excellent VIF in terms of these are films that you usually have to trek out of your way to see in theaters if you get the opportunity to see in theaters. There are some international films here that are going to be big ticket items in terms of like over the next 6 months and in the awards race and people watching them, like Emilia Perez, but that's going to be straight to streamers. So lots of people will see it, but it'll be on Netflix. And so then there are other like smaller international movies that would be more difficult to get the opportunity to see in theaters. But I think internationally, this has been a really fantastic VIF. And that'll be the only time I say that, considering I'm going to talk about a couple of American movies. And yeah, so
Yeah, from the little known distributors Neon and A24, your picks.
I don't know what those are. I've never heard of those.
Of course you don't. Yeah, I agree with what all of you were saying. I do think there's a lot of gems there, and it was nice to see some of the stuff that I missed at TIFF. So I'm really excited. The way this is going to work out is we each pick 2 films that we want to discuss. Each person's going to kind of briefly describe what the movie's about, and then we'll talk about it as the group if anyone saw it. I know there's 2 movies on this list, one from Chris and one from Marta that I did not see, so I will not be able to chime in on those second picks that you guys have. But the rest of it I have seen, and I'm very excited to hear your thoughts on all of this. So let's get started, and we're going to kick things off, Todd, with your first pick. So why don't you talk about your first pick that you have?
Yeah, so my first pick is Anora, the new Sean Baker film that won the Palme d'Or, and as I think was probably the biggest title coming into VIFF in terms of its acquisitions and things that played the festival. Probably still beating out Saturday Night, even though Saturday Night was a late addition. This film stars Mikey Madison and a whole slew of Eastern European actors whose names I would butcher if I attempted them, who are all fantastic. It is a kind of Cinderella story gone wrong, and I know all of us saw it, and some of us had mixed reactions, and others loved it. I, for one, thought Anora was just outstanding, but I've been in the bag for Sean Baker for pretty much my entire life, so short as that has been, this movie just really blew me away, and yeah.
Yeah, this is one that I was very excited for. I didn't see it at TIFF, and so I waited for VIFF to see it and made sure I got my tickets. And like you, I've been a fan of Sean Baker's for quite a while, but for some reason, this movie just did not hit me in the way I expected it to, and not in the ways that Red Rocket, Florida Project, and Tangerine did for me as well. That's not to say it was bad in any sense of the word. It just, I'm used to Sean Baker kind of showing the underbelly of America and where, true beauty really lies. And, it's not the first time that he's dealt with sex workers, but like, I don't know, for me, this movie just felt a little too neat and polished, and I can't quite put my finger on it. It was not a bad movie by any stretch. It just didn't excite me or give me the same well of emotions that I've gotten from past Sean Baker films. And so in that sense, it left me a little bit cold. And as good as Mikey Madison was, I kind of think she was outshined by basically all of her co-stars. They all had more scene-stealing moments, and maybe that's because we're with Mikey Madison the entire runtime. So anytime these different people pop in and out of the film, they just popped a bit more for me in that regard. In the end, I found myself most sympathizing with Igor, the bodyguard guy that ends up having to be dragged along in this whole adventure throughout New York City with them. But Marta, I know that you're a massive fan of this one. I saw your rating on Letterboxd. So why don't you just discount everything I just said, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think next to another movie I'm going to be chatting about later on, this was probably definitely my favorite at the festival. And I think that's just due to it going in a direction that I didn't expect. I feel like all the reviews that I would see online kept saying, it's a Cinderella story for the modern age. And that seemed to be the sort of tagline that I kept seeing over and over and over again. But as I mentioned in my Letterboxd review, it reminded me a lot more of Fellini's Nights of Cabiria for the modern age. Because it does take a dark turn that, again, I just completely did not expect. And I really appreciated that. I liked that. I like that Baker doesn't tie things up in this pretty little bow. And the ending left me with a lot to think about. I'm not going to obviously spoil it for anybody that hasn't seen it, but It was a sort of ending that really had me dwelling on it for much longer than I anticipated. And it's actually what bumped my rating up even higher the more I sat and kind of thought about it. But, I do kind of agree with you, Dakota, as well. I did feel like the actors who played the goons, let's call them, they did seem to outshine Mikey Madison a few times for me as well. Yeah.
It's my favorite of the fest. Baker for me has always been a very empathetic voice for like the fringes of America. And I think generally his films, they're usually focused purely on those fringes of America, and we just feel the external pressure working on them. But in this case, we actually got to see the external pressure working on them. And generally, that's what's missing in Baker's films prior to that. I've enjoyed all his films, but this was the one where I feel like he was like, no, 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 I'm gonna kick it up a notch. We're gonna change things here. We can't just keep doing the same kind of tone, which I feel like he does generally do this sort of not magic. Like he always likes to be a little playful with his levity and stuff in his drama, and I think some people have a problem with that with some of the characters he'll depict. Some people are like, "Ooh, you're showing them in too nice of a light." And I think Baker knows that he's showing them in a very nice light. Igor's a very interesting character because you're not really supposed to be on his side for a bit. And that actor, actually, Yuri, I forget his last name. He's from Compartment Number 9, if anybody watched that film. And he was extremely good in that, very empathetic. And yeah, just for me, this just felt like Baker kind of sort of, I don't know, it's not his masterpiece. I bet he's got another one that's just as good in him, but it's the closest to perfection I think he's gotten. And I loved it.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, I'm definitely the lone dissenter on this. I think one of the things that also doesn't really work as well for me was the Vanya character. I never really bought the love story from his side of things. Now, obviously, in the end, that's supposed to become pretty apparent, but like, I just never saw anything more than a child skirting responsibilities, and the scenes where we're supposed to be swept up in this whirlwind romance just didn't really work for me because it didn't feel real to me at any point. The closest I got was after their marriage when they're on the Vegas Strip, and he's like, "That's my wife. That's my wife." That's kind of about it for me. So I think that was something that held me back from enjoying this film more, appreciating it more, was that I didn't feel the actual love story was actually really there.
That's interesting. I think that I never believed the love story is one of the reasons it worked so well for me. There's like this weird pivot that happens in the movie, but like plot wise, which isn't weird at all, but thematically, where you kind of know that what these goons want isn't even really that unreasonable. So it's like, in a way, right, Sean has always dealt with the fringes of society, and while Nora or Annie, the character, is a sex worker and is the kind of prototypical Sean Baker protagonist, or just character type really in general, I do think that Toros and Igor and these other goons are the kind of fringe of society, of American society here, that is really getting the spotlight in the movie. And I do think that Annie as a character is definitely the protagonist, and I think Mikey Madison is amazing in this role. But you're not seeing a whole lot new from that. Now, it's new if you've not seen Sean Baker's past work, right? And I do think it is a very important depiction, but it's humanizing this goon squad because I don't believe the love story in the beginning. And I think that thematically, those clashes like really work for me, because if I had bought the love story, it's really hard to not see them as just pure antagonists. But the comedy of it all mixed with the heart means that you are kind of rooting for nearly every character in the movie. and with a couple of very notable exceptions. And so that, yeah, that works for me, and in the opposite regard. Not to, I think, for some people, obviously, it makes a lot of sense that if you don't believe the love story, it won't work for you. For me, because I didn't believe it, it worked better.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. And I think that that's what's so interesting about this film is you can understand almost everybody's point of view. Like you can understand that Annie should know better, but she has this guy throwing insane amounts of cash at her that she just goes along with it, right? And to Todd's point as well, you can also understand and sympathize with these goons as well. Because they never seem like they want to be there. I mean, one of them came from a baptism?
A baptism,
Like he
yeah.
clearly wants to go back to his baptism. So I think that's a really, really interesting thing about this movie, and that I really appreciated, is that you do carry empathy for nearly every single character.
Yeah, that's definitely a Sean Baker hallmark for sure, is being able to empathize and sympathize with characters of society that you don't normally expect to. Does anyone have a last thoughts on that film before we move on to the next one?
Watch it.
No?
Yeah, that's basically it. Watch it.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Todd. I think this was the single big ticket movie of the festival because it's probably the one out of everything that played that's most likely. This and one other one that we're actually going to talk about to be nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars, probably be up for awards all at every different award show and things like that. So I think it's a real big ticket one that movie buffs are definitely going to have their eyes on. But Chris, let's go over to you and how about you talk about your first movie?
Yeah, so Universal Language is Matthew Rankin's sophomore feature film. I don't know if anyone had seen the 20th Century prior, but this is basically building on his love of Canada. He is a Canadian filmmaker, and this is also Canada's Oscar submission. His love of Canada, but also his love for cinema. Specifically, in this case, Universal Language draws inspiration from a lot of early Iranian cinema, well, specifically late 80s, early 90s. And I always, the White Balloon from Panahi was the one that just kept coming to mind whenever I watched it, because the central premise is just two school children find a 500 rial bill, rial being the currency in this faux Winnipeg that he has created. And they just want to get this 500 rial bill from this block of ice that they found and just pay for someone's glasses. And that's it. That's the premise. But all through it, you get this sense of human connection as family. Like Matthew Rankin plays Matthew, and he goes back to Winnipeg to connect with his family and just revisit his hometown. He sees it's pretty much the same. It's changed a little bit. But the big hook with Universal Language, I think, and what makes people immediately, I think, interested is that Matthew Rankin has depicted Canada as a bilingual country, but not French and English. Instead, is Persian and English, or Persian and French. Sorry. And so all the signs are written in Farsi, including a Tim Hortons sign that I think every Canadian just looks at and goes, that seems like you're skirting copyright laws. And honestly, for me, it's one of the best films of the festival. It's got really good performances. It has a lot of its influences on its sleeve. Roy Anderson, Wes Anderson, even a little bit. Matthew Rankin clearly loves Guy Madden, and also, again, like Iranian cinema, specifically Panahi and Kiarostami are, like, I think, big influences for him in this film. But yeah, I think it's the best Canadian film I've seen this year, and I saw quite a few Canadian films at VIFF this year.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. I saw it during TIFF and thought it was absolutely incredible. I'm glad we're getting to talk about it here today. And yeah, I think for me, what works the most for this is just how assured the world building is that Rankin has managed to create, including in some pretty crazy and heightened scenarios that like starts out as a joke, and then as the movie kind of goes on, he just bakes it all in so seamlessly that it feels so natural and realistic. Like I think of all the stuff with turkeys. You know, the first time we get a joke at a turkey shop, we're not even quite sure exactly what this building is. Are they selling turkeys? Are they hiring turkeys? What's the deal here that they're doing? And it's like, oh, that's pretty funny. And then the movie kind of keeps this gag going. And then you kind of realize that turkeys are sort of celebrities in this movie world that Rankin has created. And you're just like, what is going on here? And then by the end of it, you're just like, I would die for this turkey. Blown away by this movie. And we had a pretty lengthy conversation in our Cascadia Film Critics group chat talking about this a couple weeks ago and talking about the Tim Hortons specifically. And I think that's the most indicative thing of what Rankin was able to accomplish with this film in terms of taking such an iconic Canadian symbol and tweaking it enough to have these Persian influences. So it feels like a Persian tea house, but it still sort of feels like a Tim Hortons in a small town where everyone goes and gathers, and you know, they go there after hockey practice, they go there for their morning coffee run, they go there, you know, over their lunch break, things like that. You still get that feeling, even though it feels like a Persian tea house and doesn't look like a Tim Hortons other than the sign, but you still get that feeling that you think of these fond memories of. And in capturing that, I think Rankin has managed to actually define what it feels like to be a Canadian in a very unique and interesting way. Now, this is a movie that I'm very curious to hear if non-Canadians watch it and what their reactions are. Todd, I know you've been living in Canada long enough that I feel like you understand all these cultural touchstones that this movie is kind of going for. But like, I think it was someone like Thomas Stoneham Judge watched it. I was like, yeah, it was fine. But I think it's because these connections that we have with Canadiana is just so ingrained from us. It's a foreign thing to other people. And I think Rankin nails that absolutely completely. And I would love to see this movie get nominated at the Oscars for Best International Film, because I think it's truly a gem. And if this means more people can watch it, then, you know, I'm all for that. But I've talked enough there. Marta, was this one that you were able to catch up with?
No, I didn't get a chance to watch this one, unfortunately, but hearing Chris say Kiarostami, my mind just like immediately hopped on Letterboxd, added it to my watch list. So I'm definitely going to check it out, considering Kiarostami is one of my favorite filmmakers.
It really does feel like a modern Iranian film. Like, I am shocked that this white guy from Winnipeg who, you know, has spent the last little while living in Montreal has managed to create a spot on Persian film. Like, it is absolutely shocking.
Wow. Okay. I'm excited. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say I do think going back to like your Tim Hortons point is, I think that Rankin probably watched a lot of Iranian cinema and was like, well, a lot of it is just boiling down. What do these locations and what do these things actually mean to the people that inhabit them? And I think Tim Hortons, he boiled that down to its essence. And that's why he's so easily able to just, it doesn't feel like Canada, but it does feel like Canada. And the fact that he's able to do that within this film is indicative of the fact that I think he just tried to deconstruct whatever he could, and try to do that human element as opposed to the establishment itself.
And Todd, was this one that you were able to see? I think I remember you talking about it.
I have not been able to catch it. I have a screener for it. I've been sitting on it. This has been a festival where especially a lot of the stuff I've seen has been like the last thing playing of the night. So I've been very sparing with my watching things at home, because I want to make sure that I'm giving the things that I watch at home the same attention and consideration that I give the things in the theater. And the theaters, which I've been basically living at, have just, you know, worn me down. So when I'm home, it's sleeping or working, because that is still a prerequisite to living in society. And then otherwise it's watching movies at theaters. and I will have it watched probably before this podcast goes up. And yeah, I mean, when I've heard about all the cultural Canadian touchstones that this film has, none of them seem foreign to me now, but I've been living here for half a decade, and I try to like return to the Todd of 5 years ago, and I think I would have been like, I don't know what any of this stuff is, right? As like just a pure American, I think a lot of that Canadian iconography would be lost on me, as it seems it was lost on a couple of our like American compatriots in our group of film critics. But yeah, I'm very excited for this film, and so that's why I haven't watched it. Otherwise, I would have just thrown it on and watched it as background. But no.
Yeah, I sort of wonder. I think all the scenes that take place in Winnipeg are, mostly straightforward, but I wonder how the scenes that take place in Montreal will hit to a non-Canadian, because I feel like that has some of the most absurd comedy elements, especially with like the jokes about separatism and, their office walls being lined with the premier of Quebec, photos of him, all that sort of stuff. I'm curious about how that would land for a non-Canadian, whereas the rest, I think, especially if you've seen any, recent Iranian film from the last 30 years, you could kind of understand what Rankin is going for in the Winnipeg sections. It's sort of the rest of it that I think might be a little bit confusing to some viewers. What do you think about that, Chris?
I mean, I will say the Montreal. First of all, it's great moments in Montreal there, but it reminded me the most of Roy Anderson's films, specifically Songs from the Second Floor. I think cinema fans, I think, will appreciate it because it's got the same production qualities, I feel like, as a Roy Anderson. The staging is very similar, and the comedy is extremely similar. Like, it is just depressing while also being extremely funny. It's a very tragic comic. And yeah, honestly, but yes, I'm over here laughing because I see Canadian references there that are being skewered, and I don't think those would land elsewhere. However, I do think the intent of the scene still, like, those scenes would still land. Yeah, just because you can see the influences, I feel like, and they still land even if you can't see the influences, they're still funny. So
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let us move on to our next pick. And Marta, what is the first movie you want to talk about today?
It is All We Imagine Is Light by Payal Kapadia. It was the Grand Prix winner at Cannes this year. The first time an Indian film actually won the award. So very exciting stuff. And this movie is, for me, just like a prime example of what I love going to VIFF for. And that's just watching an international film that, as we were saying at the start, you may not be able to catch in theaters as easily as some of the other stuff that's playing. And it really blew me away. Next to Anora, this was my favorite movie of the festival. I guess I'll describe the plot really quickly, even though it's pretty basic or not much really happens. But this story takes place in Mumbai, follows the lives of three nurses. Prabha is, I believe, the lead. She has this sorrow about her husband, whom she didn't even know that well, left her and moved to Germany. And she doesn't speak to him at all anymore. Then she has a roommate, Anu. She's navigating this secret relationship she has with her Muslim boyfriend. She's Hindu, so they're just trying to find like a moment of intimacy together. And they want to be together openly. And then lastly, there is Parvati, the final nurse, and she is facing eviction from these property developers. And that's kind of the film. Honestly, it's a movie where you just watch these women go through their lives over the course of, I don't even know if it's like a full week. But I think Kapadia captures this like restlessness and alienation that really feels universal. it's just a perfect example of, I think, slow cinema. Kind of had the same effect on me as Goodbye Dragon Inn, if any of you have seen it, where you just kind of watch it and you let it really wash over you. Just this urban romanticism as well, I thought was really, really beautiful. And again, it's a film that doesn't really guide you with this dramatic plot, but it's just something that you really have to feel. And for me personally, I felt like these emotions just kind of crept up on me. And by the time we got to the final act, I was all of a sudden just had tears in my eyes. I was like, what is going on? And the whole film really just, to me, felt like this ode to womanhood and female friendships, and just kind of reminding you that you're not alone. And it does so in such a gentle way that you may not even realize it until you reach the film's end.
Yeah, this was a movie I feel like it's grown on me since I saw it. We were sitting next to each other during the screening, and I came out of it being like, it's okay, but I feel like since it's ended, it's grown on me a bit more. I think the movie's lack of concrete plot held me back a little bit, where it felt like it took a long time for the movie to get going, where, you know, we're just kind of, you know, fly on the wall watching these women's lives. And it kind of takes a little bit for plot to sort of emerge out of this. And I think that was a bit of a tricky point for me, where I spent half the movie going, what am I watching? What's going on here? What am I seeing? And by the time, you know, we actually understand who these characters are and what their stories are, by that point, I felt like I wasn't as invested as I should have been, which is, you know, probably that's a me problem more than anything. I did think it was beautifully shot. It was nice to see, you know, a glimpse into modern India in such a non-heightened way. Like it's not overly romanticized. It's also not, you know, super grimy and disgusting like you could have gone if you were like, oh, we're going to go into the bowels of the city sort of thing. It's just sort of like an everyday look at, you know, the pressures to survive day in, day out when you're just kind of making it by. And so I found that was very interesting and a great look into India, but I wish I connected more to it. The final shot is absolutely stunning and so beautiful to look at. It's funny. I leaned over to Todd afterwards. I was like, oh, it's like Y tu mamá también, except for instead of them realizing that was a fleeting moment, we don't know what this moment actually is for these people. So that was sort of my feelings on it. Todd, what about you? How'd you feel about it?
I think I came down somewhere in between you and Marta in terms of I was definitely like locked in and vibed with it really like the whole time. I don't think that it as profoundly impacted me as it did Marta. That being said, I think it's a really like a stellar film in terms of its like technical achievement. Whether or not it sings to you is one thing, and I think there have been a lot of films like this year actually, where like I could give almost that verbatim like same kind of review back to it. I know that Chris and I, for instance, are very big on I Saw the TV Glow. I think this is like they're very different films. Like I'm probably the first person in the world to compare them. But in terms of the technical achievement, I think it's undeniable no matter how you feel about the film. But whether or not it connects with you is really going to determine whether or not how much the film sings to you. And I think that there is probably a larger gap in the connection between those who really dig the film and those who are just like, yeah, it is good, and like I can acknowledge all the parts of it that really work for me, and in much the same way for both of those films. And in that regard, I think all of the performances in this movie are amazing. I think that the cinematography and score in particular are some of the best of the year. And as the film progresses, you can really see those things start to meld together. I think that it only gets better in terms of its cinematography, its score, and their kind of the means in which they elevate the narrative of these three women. And by the end, yeah, I was blown away by that last scene. I think that really that whole final stretch is incredible. But that's where I come down on it, somewhere in between you and Marta, and that it is 100% worth seeing, and if possible, seeing in a theater, because it is one that you really have to sit with and let wash over you. And I hope for everyone's sakes that people do connect with it a lot, because it is very profound, and it's an achievement in and of itself.
Was this one that you had caught, Chris?
I think it's one of my favorites of the fest. Mainly, a lot of the stuff in the first, I'd say, hour of this film, where it's spending a lot of time on Mumbai, is like fleshing out the city and understanding the pressures that are exerted on specifically women, but also just its citizens as well. And I think Kapadia's previous film, A Night of Knowing Nothing, has very similar. There's times in this movie where they'll just have radio broadcasts and things playing in the background that are just kind of letting you know stuff, or you'll learn about the politics that go on. For example, I forget the character's name. Marta, you remember that, but not Anu or Prada, the third one, the one facing eviction.
Parvati, yeah.
And like, yeah, and it's all due to some patriarchal law, basically, that ends up making it so that she can't even there's no proof that she lives there, and that's it. And you're like, okay, cool, interesting, very interesting. And so that's I think that stuff all really works, but it's not until the second half of that movie where I think that movie sings, and the score is amazing. Like, it's incredible. I think that's one of the best scores of the year. And yeah, I would probably just be echoing everything that's been said here. The performances are really good, and the cinematography is awesome. But yeah, it's not until the end that I thought that it fully sealed the deal. And yeah, I really appreciated it a lot.
Yeah, I'm glad you highlighted the score, because I was not expecting this light, jazzy score to come from this movie. And the first time you get this composition, you're like, oh, this is kind of fun. It feels a little out of place. But then as the movie goes on, it keeps kind of returning to this similar motif. And I'm like, okay, I really like that. I think, Todd, afterwards, you were like, I just want to listen to the score over and over again.
I do. I really do.
Did you guys get the vibe at all? It crossed my mind a few times, through, I guess, the use of visually the liminal space versus showing landmarks in Mumbai, but also through the script. Echoes of Wong Kar-wai.
Yeah, I can see that.
There were some lines that really stuck out to me that I was like, oh my God, this belongs in one of his movies. There was that line about blowing kisses into the sky, so then when it rains, you're like showered by your love's kisses. Just really poetic stuff. Just gets me going.
Nice. All right. Well, I think we're going to move on to the next film, which is my first pick. And I feel like everyone's been saying it so far, but this was my favorite film of the festival. And that is Conclave, which is Edward Berger's follow-up to All Quiet on the Western Front. And this is a movie about how you select the Pope, which on the surface sounds like it's not very interesting, but this is a very taut, almost political intrigue thriller where you've got Ralph Fiennes as the leader of the College of Cardinals, gathering everyone in the wake of the Pope's death to elect a new Pope. And you get different favorites emerge and the sort of factions that form behind them. And then soon as we start to get front runners to be the next Pope, you then get the people who are trying to take down these front runners for the next Pope. And so it's very much a game of wits and battle, while at the same time you've got Ralph Fiennes basically being Sherlock Holmes, trying to figure out for the future of the Catholic Church, is this person that is running, or one of the front runners, are they someone that will be a good image for the church going forward. And so we get, a whole bunch of different cardinals kind of leading the way. We've got Stanley Tucci as one guy who I believe he's supposed to be Italian in the book, but in the movie he sounds like Stanley Tucci, so there's no accent there. And then John Lithgow is another one. And then we also got a cardinal from Nigeria and one from Italy. And sort of we get all these different cardinals facing off against each other and having their own personal views and wondering how they fit in the dogma of the Catholic religion. And it's sort of a very much a battle of wits and things like that. And so as the movie goes on, we see the stock rising of some cardinals and falling from others. This is a movie, speaking about Honora being, big awards players, I think Conclave is going to be right up there as well as being probably one of the biggest awards players this coming season. And I absolutely loved it. I'm a huge sucker for, political intrigue thrillers. And so this was catnip for me. Everything about this movie absolutely worked on every level. The score, who's the same composer who did All Quiet, is back doing Conclave. And if that score didn't work for you, this one probably won't either, but that score for All Quiet really worked for me, so it really worked for me here too. But yeah, I absolutely adore this movie. I came out so psyched and amped up. And even one of the Cardinals was in the audience. The actor who played Cardinal Benitez was in the audience, which I later found out even though he's Mexican, resides in Vancouver now or something like that. So it was pretty cool. And that was a very enthusiastic crowd. So I can't imagine what he was feeling with all the gasps and laughter and even clapping at one point or another. But this movie kind of had everything for me and just worked on all cylinders. Chris, I don't know if you were at that screening, but Marta and Todd, I know you guys were there. We went out and grabbed drinks afterwards. Chris, was this one that you were able to catch?
Yeah, I did see Conclave. I wasn't at that screening.
Right.
I think I was at the press screening. I think they did for that. But yeah, I enjoyed the film. I think you're right. It's definitely going to be an awards player for acting for sure. I think Ray Fiennes is really good in this. I think John Lithgow is also extremely good. Stanley Tucci is kind of just Stanley Tucci. We'll see how that plays. But yeah, I think generally I really like the movie. I do have qualms with like the third act where I feel like it stops kind of being the I think it had a really good momentum going and then decides to be a little more sensationalist and stuff. And I have some qualms with that, but overall, it worked for me. Yeah, I don't really have much to say about Conclave because I think it's a very well made film. It handles its subject matter with the severity that it handles All Quiet on the Western Front, which is an interesting choice. Because I think all the characters sort of, because they're electing a pope, they're in that world. They treat it with that severity, whereas if you were to step outside of that, you would probably find a lot of people who would not treat it that way. So it's interesting that Berger decides to just sort of immerse in that. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I wish there was a little bit more. There's some moral stuff that it contends with, and then I think it could translate that a little broader. But it went very specific. So if you're looking for a papal thriller, it's one of a kind. So there's that. But yeah, I liked it. I think that's where I land with it. As I'm talking, I realized I'm like, maybe I'm like a little less into it than I thought I was. So yeah.
Okay, let's very quickly then change to someone else talking before you disparage it. Marta, quick, jump in.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I love this movie, Dakota, before we started recording. If it wasn't for me watching All We Imagine Is Light yesterday, I would have picked this. So my thoughts greatly align with yours. But two things, I guess, that I will highlight that you didn't, or maybe you did, I don't know. But first of all, Isabella Rossellini, absolutely incredible. I think she was used perfectly. sparingly, but very effectively, where she's just always around. She's always lingering, and she doesn't say much, but when she does, boy howdy, it's a moment that was one of my favorites in the film. And the other thing that I really wanted to highlight as well was, what was the DP's name? Stefan Fontaine, I believe it is. But I thought his work here was absolutely incredible. I was sitting next to Todd, and I remember both of us, like, multiple times, were just like pointing at the screen. There's that shot in the auditorium, or multiple shots in the auditorium that were stunning. Plus that one with the umbrellas and the cardinals walking underneath all those umbrellas, just so much eye candy to look at in that film. So yeah, I loved Conclave. I really did.
Yeah, the compositions of this movie were off the charts for sure. Todd, and what about you? Add on to the praise of this movie.
Marta took a lot of the words that I would have said that hadn't already been said out of my mouth, which, I mean, Stefan Fontaine, it is an amazingly shot film. And as you already pointed out, I think the score is also excellent. Two things that carry over from Berger's last film in All Quiet on the Western Front. But moreover, I think one of the reasons I enjoy it so much, and I think especially you, Dakota, another, and the same vein, is it's just pulp. Like, it's just, this is not, I don't mean it disparagingly, which is, I think, kind of where, the term like pulp novels and stuff came from, right? It is like rather disparaging, but it is pulp in the way that like the Maltese Falcon is based on just kind of like a pulp story, right? Like it's a little sensationalist. Yes. Got probably, and I have no idea about the book, and I imagine the book has more twists and turns because that's the nature of, 500 pages versus a 2-hour film, right? There's probably too much there in the story, and it's just meant to be enjoyed. And yet Berger and Fontaine and Fiennes and the rest of the cast in its entirety really elevate it to maybe not like the Maltese Falcon, but I'm near the same conversation, at least in terms of just like my pure enjoyment of the film. It is an extremely fun film to sit with and to be in a crowd with. And it's one that like I can easily recommend, like maybe the easiest recommendation out of the festival, where if I were passing someone on the street and all these movies weren't playing in theaters and they're like, what should I go see? I don't know. Like, if it's a stranger, I'm like, hey, go see Anora. I might look like a freak after if they don't vibe with it. But Conclave, I think I can feel pretty good about my chances of them enjoying the movie, or at least me coming off as someone that doesn't have terrible taste in film or isn't like a little freak, which I'm both. But the point still stands. I think it is a very enjoyable film. I really, really dig it.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that we none of us have pointed out, and like, is hard to explain. This movie is really funny, in ways that you don't expect. Like, it's funny because everyone is so catty with each other, and so they all have witty comebacks, and all those comebacks are hilarious. And when certain characters finally speak up, you realize what they're saying is really funny. And it's hard to describe the style of humor other than like it's just a lot of like, good clapbacks for the most part. But the humor is definitely omnipresent throughout the film, and I think that also helps lighten the mood a lot. Especially since I think if they try to do this film purely earnestly and so straightforward, I don't think it would connect with people as well, because I think, rightfully so, it's very easy to dismiss both the self-important and outsized influence that the Catholic Church has on the world. And so adding some levity to it helps break down any barriers you might have to being like, yeah, but they've also been behind sex abuse scandals, and they have these views as their politics and things like that, where you're just like, it's kind of hard to root for any of these people considering they're all in the Catholic Church. But I think the humor really helps break down all of those barriers. All right, we're gonna move right along here, and I think we're gonna spend a little bit less time on each of these next movies. But speaking of humorous movies, Todd, how about you talk about your second film?
So my next film is A Different Man. This is Aaron Schimberg's sophomore feature, I believe, starring Sebastian Stan, Adam Pearson, and Renate Reinsve. It follows an actor named Edward who basically transforms from his appearance. He transforms his appearance from one of, or I don't know what the condition is called, but he had a condition that I guess I won't spoil too much of the film, that he transforms and becomes Sebastian Stan. I mean, he wakes up one day as Sebastian Stan, for lack of a better term, which is a great way to wake up if you're like a 40-year-old guy and you just wake up as a person. And suddenly he finds that who he had been would be the ideal person to play a part in a play being written and directed by his crush, for lack of a better term, the one person he's like really truly in love with. And what ensues is a real amalgamation of, wow, we should be laughing at this, but should we be laughing at this? And like, it's tragic comedy to the highest form. And it's not my favorite of the festival, but why I chose it is because I think that the character that Sebastian Stan is playing is one of, if not the most interesting characters of the year in terms of film. I think he is extremely funny, but also plays troubled so well, and the rest of the performances in the film are very good. Renate Reinsve is great as always. I'm very much in the bag for her, and Adam Pearson plays just like a perfect like dick, for lack of a better term. Like he's like, he comes in and you're kind of like, oh, I'm vibing with this guy, and then quickly you're like, he is insufferable, and really really great performance from him. But I just think that what the film is getting at, and especially with Sebastian Stan's character, is so interesting and so different for a mainstream, or what I think will be a mainstream like Hollywood film. It's going to be tough not to be mainstream when you have Sebastian Stan as your lead, and he's in like every scene of the film. And yeah, I think this is just a really interesting film, and I know we saw this together, Dakota, but yeah, and so I just wanted to talk about it more.
Yeah. The condition that he has, I'm going to hopefully try to not butcher this, but it's neurofibromatosis, which is a condition where non-cancerous tumors grow in the nervous system. And so basically get large tumors mostly on your face, but it can manifest in different ways. So if you're not sure what Todd's sort of describing of what the Sebastian Stan sort of looks like, he has lots of large tumors that make him completely unrecognizable. And I would go so far, and the reason why he looks unrecognizable is the acting that Sebastian Stan, the clinic that he puts on, the way he has his posture and walks, and the fact that he is someone who is always trying to melt into the background, but for some reason is always in the way of everyone, and simultaneously holding these two diametrically opposed ways of holding yourself is sort of stunning to watch, and honestly probably my favorite acting performance of the year so far, if not of the last few years. I think it's absolutely incredible. And when he goes through this experimental medical procedure, shout out Vibes to the Substance at times, or other body horror films, and he ends up looking like Sebastian Stan. He doesn't start acting like Sebastian Stan, which is interesting. He still is this person he was before, and holding that on carries his character through. And on the flip side is, Adam Pearson, this actor who's playing opposite him, who doesn't show up till well over halfway through the movie, probably closer to 3/4 of the way through the movie. And he is an actor who actually has this condition, neurofibromatosis. Once again, I'm sure I'm butchering it. And he shows up, and right away you think, oh, this is who I need to have sympathy for. But you very quickly turn on that because he has toxic positivity. And you spend the whole time just like every time he comes on the screen, he goes, all right, what's he going to brag about this time? Oh, okay. He's good at doing this too. Oh, he can sing karaoke. Oh, every woman's lining up to date him. Great. Okay. And it's just shocking how quickly you go from, oh, I should pity this person to, I kind of hate this person. This guy's a bit of a dick, even though he's intentionally not being a dick, which is just such masterful screenwriting on Schimberg's part to be able to make us feel this way. And honestly, I think that is the best thing that you could get out of this. Now, does this movie totally work? No, not really, especially the end. The ending really doesn't work for me, but I will say the humor throughout it had me going. So is it a good movie? Kind of. Is it a funny movie that's enjoyable? Absolutely. So it's two very different viewpoints I hold, where I'm kind of mixed on it overall, but it's definitely a fun one to watch with a lot of great laughs. And it's nice seeing Renata Rensve again too, since for all the worst person in the world fans out there, as Todd is pumping his fists. Now, Marta, did you end up catching this one?
No, I had to work that night, sadly, but I was looking forward to this one, honestly. I really was.
This is an A24 film, so it should come out. I don't know. Todd and I were lamenting A24's release strategy. So it should be available whenever it does come out, but who knows? Maybe it'll be in theaters for a week before they, quietly drop it on VOD 6 months later. But Chris, was this one that you were able to catch?
Yeah, I did see it. I will say it's in theaters now in Canada.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So there's that. At least in Victoria. So if Victoria somehow got the exclusive, I don't know, but I doubt it. So anyways, but I did see it. I will, I agree with most sentiment here. I will say that I did not find, I think Adam Pearson's character is, yes, supposed to be grating to the viewer, but I think that is because of the direction of the film in which they made Sebastian Stan's character. You really get the interiority of his character, so almost anyone that is comfortable in their own skin is going to be grating to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was kind of the main thing. So I didn't find it as toxic positivity. I just found it as somebody who's actually just comfortable in their own skin, who is just doing the thing that he wishes he could have been doing. And I think that's where I really like the film, is in that portrayal. I will say shout out to Aaron Schimberg's first film, Chain for Life, which was the last film I saw in theaters before COVID, because that movie rules, and I think it's slightly better than A Different Man, in my opinion. Deals with a lot of similar themes. But yeah, shout out to that film. Check that out if you like this film.
Anything else you want to add there, Todd?
I mean, I agree with Chris there, even if he wasn't as high on the film as we were. But I mean, yeah, I don't know. Go see this film just to see Sebastian Stan give probably easily the best performance of his career, and yeah, it's a really fun time. Really interesting take for comedy, especially in 2024. Very audacious, and the fact that it's pulled off is pretty astounding.
Yeah. I think Sebastian Stan's about to get a lot more recognition for his work in The Apprentice, but this is the one that I would hope that he was getting awards for, because I think this is truly a phenomenal performance. All right, well, let's move over, Marta, to the second film that you want to talk about today.
Okay. This is
let's bring this mood down a little bit.
This is such a hard film to talk about. Oh man, you're right. Yeah, let's bring the mood down. It's as low as it can go. I will preface this by saying that I did truly love this film. I really did, but it's a difficult film to A, recommend, and B, talk about, because I think it's a movie that you should experience going in as blind as possible, because there is a twist that when it happens, your jaw will probably be on the floor. But the movie is The Girl with the Needle by Magnus von Horn. This one is set, I guess, yeah, let's try to describe this without giving too much away. Set in post-World War I Copenhagen. And we meet Caroline. She's a seamstress. Her husband is gone at war, but she doesn't know if he's alive or not. And she finds herself pregnant and jobless after a chain of events. And she's pretty much, things can't get worse for her until a candy shop owner takes her in and offers her shelter and employment. But then things aren't what they seem, and life just gets even more sinister. So I guess that's the best way to describe it without really giving away the major beats. But this is, yeah, this movie was, I mean, weird. It's weird to call it striking, but it is, even though those visuals are really horrendous. I can't remember the DP's name, but he worked on EO from a few years ago, that donkey movie. But he really transforms Copenhagen into this hellscape. It is so dirty and grimy, the way he frames characters in alleyways and these interiors is just absolutely filthy. And the whole thing just really looks like a dark fairy tale as we follow this woman who is, just trying to survive the best way that she knows how. And the movie also ends up incorporating, it's loosely inspired off of a true story. I would say that this movie ends up going into horror territory for me personally, which I wasn't expecting. I thought this was going to be a drama, just a dark drama, but it takes a turn into, true horror, true crime. And I also found it to be impactful for the present day as well. I think it really does resonate. Touches on these contemporary discussions of, reproductive rights and the limited choices women have when they're struggling to build a better life. I don't know if you guys are aware as well, Denmark has had a huge sort of controversy regarding abortion as well over the past few years. And I think that is also shown in this film as well. And you get some phenomenal performances as well. Our lead, Caroline, she, I think she was incredible in this role. She really embodies this sort of exhaustion and trauma that was required for the role. You can see it in her eyes. She doesn't even have to say much. And then the woman who plays the candy shop owner, she was also brilliant as well. She does this phenomenal mix of coming across as warm when need be, but also just so chillingly cold as well. And yeah, like I said, this isn't really a film that's going to be easy to recommend. I think you really have to have an iron stomach for it. But if you can sit through it, I think it's a worthwhile watch. And one thing I really appreciated about Von Horn is the story never feels exploitative. The true crime portion of it, and I think that is because he didn't decide to make that portion the main thing. Like, the person who is a part of true history isn't the main character here. And I think that's what kind of made it okay for me and made me feel like, okay, yes, this is a heavy movie, but it's not mean. There's a purpose behind it. And it's just showing, I mean, how desperate circumstances can lead someone to unforgivable actions. The horror is society itself, not any sort of individual in this film. So I guess those are my rambling thoughts.
I unfortunately did not get the chance to see this. Did either of you two guys catch this one? I don't think you did, Todd, but Chris,
I did.
You? Oh, you did, Todd? Oh, okay. Well,
I
then
did.
Todd, let's throw it to you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm the only one. All right, then. Both you two guys take it away then.
I didn't see it either. I didn't see it
okay.
either. It was on my list, but there's too many depressing movies, so I said I'm cutting one. And this was unfortunately the one that made the cut.
I said something very similar to Marta.
I I agree with everything Marta said. I think this movie is a very tough recommendation. It's yeah, I mean I won't spend too much more time on it. It's Edgar Allan Poe is what it is. It's exactly that where it's like, is it horror? Kind of. Is it macabre? Definitely. Like it's definitely dark and sinister and sincere. And I think all of those things that ring out in the poetry of Edgar Allan Poe shine through in this film, and that's pretty much where those similarities end. Just thematically, there's no content that's the same between the two. But that's just what I kept thinking about that over and over as I was watching it. Is it's it's not freak show, although there is like a freak show element to the film, and it's not horror, although there's a horror element, and it is certainly not exploitative, although it delves into victims of at least like 4 or 5 different things that we have seen consistently exploited on screen, from obviously like um the those that need an abortion, right? That is an often exploited thing put to screen, to just like drug abuse, right? There are like multiple things on screen that you're like, yeah, that's not super well portrayed all the time. And somehow this film navigates way more than its fair share of them, and it does it very well. And when it is operating on its like highest, darkest levels, I think it is one of the best horror films, or I don't know, dark films of the last few years. It is very, very good.
Well, I'll say this. I think the two of you did a much better job sort of selling it to me than the VIF program did. I think, it's so tough when you're going through and trying to pick out which movies you want to watch. If you don't recognize a title, you have one sentence to basically hook you and be like, okay, I'm going to add this to my schedule because there's 10 other things playing at the same time that I want to see as well. So how's this going to stand out? And I think that might have been what held me back a little bit, is the description was not selling me. And I think the two of you did a very good job of making this movie sound a lot more interesting and not just depressing. And so it is one that I do want to see. Marta, reading your letterboxed review of it definitely sold it for me too. This is Denmark's official submission to the Oscars as well. So it looks like this is one of the higher profile international films this year. So I think it stands a good chance of getting nominated. But I'll be very curious to sort of see where it goes from here, what kind of an audience it'll get, what sort of reception it's going to have, and all that sort of stuff.
So far, it seems like people are really divided, at least on Letterboxd. From what I'm seeing, they're either, really loving it, or they're absolutely hating it. So I'll be curious as well to see how it goes outside of the festival circuit. But there's a lot to appreciate here. Even just, visually, it's a stunning film.
Excellent. Well, good to know. I look forward to hopefully checking that out somewhat soon. I don't know what the release date strategy is for that. All right, Chris, let's go over. Let's keep this good vibes going, and you talk about your second film.
Yeah, so like I said, I tried to cut as many depressing things as I could. Didn't want to be too bleak, so instead I decided to watch No Other Land, documentary about the Israeli occupation on the West Bank, and it is done by a Palestinian-Israeli collective, which is what drew my interest, because it is both sides working together for the same cause here, which is to portray the unjust occupation of the West Bank, and how the Israeli government used the grounds of military training as a reason to destroy villages. It is not a fun documentary, but that being said, there is a friendship at the center of this between Basil Adra, who is the main activist in the film, and I'm forgetting the name, but it is the other director, Yuval Abraham, and there's 2 other directors as well, Hamdan Balal and Rachel Zor. But Yuval and Basil basically form a relationship within this. Basil is a Palestinian activist, who lives in the Masayata area. And Yuval is an Israeli journalist who's come over to cover it. However, trying to cover something that Israel does not want covered. Obviously, there are a lot of roadblocks that happen, both literally and figuratively. And yeah, it is a very, very depressing film. And usually with these ones that are extremely timely, your knee-jerk thing is to say, "Oh, this is vital cinema," but it really is. And it's one of those ones that I was most struck by the fact that it seemed self-aware of the fact that a lot of people will watch like a 20 Days in Maripol uh, and other documentaries. I'm blanking on other depressing ones. I'm sure people can name them, but they watch them and then they're call to action kind of, but you sit there in your living room watching 20 Days in Maripol and you just go, "Oh, that sucks," and then you don't really what are you doing? And this film seems kind of self-aware that people will do that. They will watch this film and they will kind of go, "Oh, that really sucks. Am I going to do anything? What can I do?" And the film doesn't leave you with answers of what you can do, but it shows the things that people have done. And so I think it's really, really important, especially for activism, especially for knowing what's going on over there, because it is a very, very bleak portrayal of something very bleak happening. It's one of the few films I think that I left kind of like shook from the festival. And yeah, words won't really do it service because it images are its power, and it does do a lot with social media as well, and the vitality of social media. There's another film at the festival, Seed of the Sacred Fig, that also is kind of similar. In its like, oh, social media is like a really, really important part of this. And if you enjoyed that film, enjoyed again another bleak film, then you will probably enjoy No Other Land as well. Again, it's probably also, I don't know about awards. I don't know what, but it is one of the Letterboxd has it at a 4.2 or something right now for its average. So it seems like people are pretty high on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it so far has not been submitted by either country for Best International Film. I don't know if Israel or Palestine has submitted a film.
It would be a documentary, and that's it. I think I don't think it would have any chance for international.
I unfortunately was not able to catch this, but like just on the log line alone, a Palestinian and Israeli filmmakers teaming up together to sort of make this film really sells it. And like you think about it, you're like, oh, that sounds like an odd pairing, but the reality is it's like people just want to live without fears of violence or their family or loved ones living in violence, and have the ability to live a prosperous life in whatever way that might look for them. And that's what the human connection is sort of all about. And I think you're talking about whether or not, anytime a hot topic movie comes out, is this vital cinema? Things like that, words like that get thrown around a lot. And like the answer is yes. And it sort of reminds you why movies and film are considered an art form in the sort of truest sense. And like, yes, we can get these stunning compositions of Conclave and be like, this is art, this is visual art. But then we also can get movies like No Other Land where we understand what the human connection about this medium that we all love and appreciate so much can truly accomplish. So I haven't seen it yet, but everything that you've said about it so far, I know you talked about it in person to me as well, and a little bit in the group chat, and now here again, and just sort of makes me all the more curious and excited to finally get around to it. Did either of you see it, Todd and Marta, or no?
I did not, but I did watch The Seed of the Sacred Fig. So, as Chris was saying, I mean, if I, in quotation marks, enjoyed that, I mean, which I did, but it's a weird thing to say. Then I'm sure I'll certainly enjoy this as well, and I'll check it out. The social media aspect of it, I do find fascinating. It was similar with Fig too, where it really does underscore the significance of social media in some parts of the world.
I did not watch it yet. Chris and I have talked about it. This is going to be another one that I'll have watched by the time the podcast goes up. As I've had a screener for it, but this film above all others has been the one where I get home and I'm like, I want to watch that, but I don't have the energy, and this really deserves the energy because of its subject matter and the style of filmmaking. It's so rare, especially when you're dealing with a conflict as large as the illegal and unethical occupation of the West Bank. And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing it, which is also, as Marta said, kind of weird to say.
I have a question for you, Chris. When by the end of the movie, sort of, I know it's a documentary, so spoilers work a little bit differently, but would you say that you felt hopeful by the end, or was it just sort of, despair that you were kind of left by the end of it?
I think you don't even need to see the movie to know that you don't necessarily feel hopeful. But it is vocalized in the film as well, of just like a very like throughout. It's just is there any hope in this situation? And that again plays to, okay, if there's no hope in this situation, why are we still trying to cover this when when you're an Israeli journalist who actually is being like blocked constantly from covering things? And why am I still an activist? Why am I still trying to help? And the fact that they do justify it because it's people's lives.
Yeah.
That's the answer. And so while it is very hopeless feeling, I there is that little glimmer of hope. It is, yeah. There's just enough where you're like, okay, yeah, you should do this.
Fair enough. Okay, well, let us move on to our last film. Sorry to pivot so hard to a much lighter film, I guess, but one I want to talk about is Rumors, which is the new Guy Maddin and Johnson Brothers film. We've already mentioned Guy Maddin once and his influence on universal language, and this sort of feels like it's the year of Guy Maddin for me, because another film that I really appreciate that I want to talk about was one called The Mother and the Bear, which he has a cameo in that and has some Guy Maddin vibes in terms of sensibility to depicting Winnipeg is there as well. But yeah, Rumors. How to describe this? So at a G7 conference with all the leaders of these 7 countries gathered in Germany, they are having a dinner in a gazebo, and their duty is to start working on a speech. This movie is so hard to describe. Working on an introductory speech to cover a crisis that is never mentioned by name by anyone. And in fact, I question whether or not they even know what crisis it is that they are supposed to be talking about. And while they are trying to write said speech, they end up getting attacked by ostensibly bog people is probably the the easiest description of what these things are, although they assume they are protesters, which leads to a great line where they're arguing about whether or not these people are protesters, and they said, well, they had no signs and no unified chants, and they didn't make any complaints about anything specific on the slate that we're talking about, so I don't know if they're protesters, which is just like a great image in particular of how removed politicians are from, people that oppose their viewpoints. But basically, this movie doubles as 2 different themes. One, this is about writer's block, and watching a bit of a Q&A afterwards, a pre-recorded Q&A with Maddin and the Johnsons, where they talk about the movie is very much about how it feels to have writer's block when you're supposed to have something on a deadline and you're trying to write it and you can't figure it out. But this also is very much satirizing world leaders and politics and how far removed from reality these people are. And they'll say platitudes, but they don't even understand the words that they're saying. And so we get a lot of great specific humor because this is the G7. This is, let's see if I can name them all: Germany, Canada, the United States, Italy, the United Kingdom, Japan, and France. Oh, got it. So we do get a lot of specific humor for all of these countries as well. The lead is basically Canada, which is played remarkably by the very wonderful Canadian actor Roy Dupuis, who basically is playing a version of Justin Trudeau. And doesn't matter where you fall on the political spectrum. I think there's enough to laugh at about Justin Trudeau, and Roy Dupuis playing Prime Minister Maxime Laplace really sort of nails all the humorous aspects about Trudeau's persona, which is fantastic. And then you've got Cate Blanchett, who's basically playing a version of Angela Merkel. For some reason, we have Charles Dance, the fantastic British thespian, playing the American president, which makes zero sense. And to the point where they make a joke when they say, what's up with your accent? And then he starts to explain it, and then something happens, and then it's never revisited again. And so it's just a great little touch of, like, we know we cast Charles Dance as the American president, and it makes no sense, and he has a British accent, but just go with it. This movie doesn't fully work. It really doesn't. And much like A Different Man, I think the humor is all there for me, but does it thematically work? Not quite, but I think it's such a fascinating, interesting movie that it's just one I want to hear other people talk about. So I'm going to stop talking myself and sort of turn the tables here. Todd, what were your thoughts on Rumors?
I liked Rumors. I definitely think it's a film that doesn't totally work, but its humor is great. Its humor definitely works for me, and that's the performances. Everything else, kind of take it or leave it. It doesn't really matter, I think, in the end. Like, it's not super consequential what the plot of the film is, and so I imagine knowing that going in, I would have liked it even more, because there's definitely a part of me that's like trying to figure out, where is this going to go? What's going to happen? How invested should I be? And the reality is, and this is not a spoiler, you really shouldn't be that invested in the story of it all. It's definitely more of just, you're going to hang out with these characters, these like caricatures of politicians. And insofar as you're doing that, it's very funny. It's a very enjoyable film. On the lower half of films that I think like work as a cohesive whole for me at the festival, but also a film that I really greatly enjoyed in terms of just like sitting with it, and would be a really fun one to watch with other people as well, right? Like, this is one that Chris and I saw together in a mostly empty press and industry screening, and I think it would have been definitely benefited had we seen it with a crowd that was also just kind of vibing with the humor, because it was really like just us.
I mean, the crowd definitely helped, especially when we get to the final speech. That moment, I'm not going to spoil, worked great in the crowd, because you have a mix of like shock and terror with just people losing it, probably peeing their pants at how hard they were laughing in that moment. And so hearing the combination of those two sounds together mixed with what was coming from the screen was a pretty great moment for sure. And I don't think you can recreate that watching it on your own or in a press screening with, a dozen people sort of thing.
Right.
How did you feel about it though, Chris?
I'm definitely like lukewarm on it. I'm a big fan of Madden. I thought it was like the least Madden film. And it was funny that Rankin released Universal Language as well same year, and it's like, yeah, that he out Madden. Anyways, but I don't know. There's still really good. Like, I think the thing about Madden's films is generally they have a lot of really good comedy in them still, even if the film itself doesn't work. It's like there's a great Charles Dance complaining that he thought he would be killed someday by someone because there were too many bridges, not enough songbirds. I was like, oh, okay, great line, awesome. And I think my biggest hurdle with the film was just that it is the personification of each country. Like that's like so obvious from the beginning of the film, and it still feels the need to tell you that it's the personification of each country, and it does that multiple times with other themes that it has going on, and I think that was the stuff that I was just like, oh, like show don't tell. Like you're doing such a good job, I think, setting this up. All these people just like pulling from other previous speeches in order to try to write this current speech, but don't be too controversial. Don't be like all this stuff is like really good, but then when they start getting outright direct with it all, I was like, I could take it or leave it. And I think that's where it started losing me. But Roy Dupuy, easily the MVP of that film.
Which is saying a lot because there's a lot of MVPs in this film too.
There's a lot of really good, but I really, Roy Dupuy, I honest to God, I think he like stands above all of them, even Kate Blanchett. Like, Roy Dupuy's like, yeah, no, Kate Blanchett, I'm better than her. It's good, and I do appreciate a movie that puts Canada front and center. It's obviously a Guy Madden film, so it's gonna do that. But like to have all these other nations and be like, no, Canada's gonna be front and center in this narrative. I'm like, all right, sure.
Yeah, it's ironic that a movie sort of about writer's block really suffers in the script at moments, because I sort of felt that too, where it almost felt like a poorly improvised film where I'm like, okay, you've gone through this bit, you can move on to the next portion of the film. How do we move this story forward? And it often felt like they were stuck at points narratively, and I think that is something that is going to sort of hinder the film and maybe stop it from getting maybe more attention or more praise or things like that. Like this is not a movie that's going to appear at any award show. Maybe next year at the Canadian Screen Awards, it might get something for makeup or special effects or something, or maybe if we're lucky, Roy Dupuy. But like this is not going to be on critics' top 10 lists. It's not going to be on the Oscars. It's not going to be at the Golden Globes. Nothing like that. So it doesn't have to worry about that. But also, I think if it had a stronger narrative and better themes, it probably could maybe have a bit more popularity behind or something like that. I think that's really going to hinder its actual chances of being seen and loved. Marta, was this one that you were able to catch? I can't remember if you saw it or not.
No.
That's why you've been quiet.
I wanted to, didn't get a chance to. You guys started selling it for me, and then now I don't know. But if I was to see it, I would definitely see it in theaters, though. As you were saying, Dakota, just in a crowd where you can laugh and be joyous.
I mean, like, it's funny. Like, I want to sell this movie harder. It is really, really funny, and the performances are worth it. In the end, it's just one that you're like, oh yeah, it was really funny, but like, it's not that deep. It's a very simple satire of what it's going for, but I still think it's one that's worth checking out purely because some of the gags are so great that like I'm going to be remembering and referencing them for years to come.
Oh, worth it for me then. That's enough to get me my butt in theaters. So yeah, for sure. I will definitely watch that.
All right. Well, those were 8 of the movies that we saw during VIFF. I know we all saw lots more than that, and we've covered them extensively. But I want to thank the 3 of you for coming on the show. I really appreciate hearing all of your takes on all of these films. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me
on.
Thank
you, Dakota. This was so much fun.
Well, I want to make sure that everyone can follow your work. And if you want to let me know what you're working on, Chris, what's the best place for people to find you? And is there anything in specific you want people to check out?
Yeah, asynchronousmedia.com has all my social media handles. You can follow me on Twitter on there, which I occasionally post on, but mostly Instagram, which is also there. I'm just working on VIF reviews right now, so and I forget what I've already published, but Universal Language Review is up, so there's that. So just follow me there, I guess.
Of course. Marta, what about you?
For me, I mean, my podcast, as you mentioned at the start, McFly's Movie House, I will also be launching a publication by the new year. So for information regarding that, I mean, it's probably just best to follow my Instagram since I update that the most. That's marta.mcfly. And as for Letterboxd, same thing, but no period.
Okay. Are you going to be doing any VIF related episodes on your podcast?
No, probably not. We are wrapping the first
okay.
season end of October, and then I am looking at some new projects and new shows to start up.
All right, then. Well, it's a fantastic podcast. It's one of my favorite ones. So I always enjoy when new episodes drop with both you and the great guests that you have on.
Thank you.
Todd, what about you? Where can people find you? Is there anything you want to specifically promote?
You can find my socials are Todd_complex. I think on everything, maybe minus the underscore. Not totally sure. It switches up from like thing to thing, except for Instagram. You can find everyone else on Instagram. I don't have Instagram. That was way before my time. That's for like old people. And I will have a whole line of VIF reviews coming out this week, and probably also as some of these things hit wider too at thisisforreal.com, where you can find most of my work. Yeah.
Well, I know I have a Todd complex, so
Yes,
it's a very
you do.
fitting username that you have.
You do.
Once again, yes. Once again, thank you three very much. This has been a That Shelf podcast. Visit thatshelf.com for more great film discourse. Follow the show on Instagram, Twitter, and Threads at ContraZoomPod. Did you see anything at VIF this year? Send an email to ContraZoomPod@gmail.com. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube, we do post all episodes there as well. And if you really like the show, consider tipping us on coffee. Thanks for checking us out.